So today on Online for Authors, I'm chatting with Patrick Naughton Jr., author of Born from War. Welcome, Patrick.
Hey, Terry, thank you so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I'm looking forward to it as well. I loved the book. I learned quite a bit, but before we really dive in, can you give listeners an idea of what they're going to find when they open up the cover of Born from War?
Sure. So I hope that they find a book that appeals to a broader audience and not just a military audience. Obviously, it's a military historian slash memoir slash biography, all thrown in together with a sprinkle of war stories from two different wars. But I hope that it doesn't just be attractive to military people who like military books or veterans and so on. I hope that it reaches a broader audience, and so that's really what I hope that they find when they read Born from War.
Right. You get started in the book and you're talking about essentially your dad's war, which was Vietnam, and then your war, which was the Iraqi war. And I was surprised by some of the similarities. Somehow in my mind, I don't know, each conflict is so significantly different. And yet you really focused on how similar. How surprised were you by that revelation of realizing that they were a lot alike in many respects?
Yeah, I was really shocked, and there was some books that came out of the Vietnam War that I obviously read for my research that I wish every officer and NCO and soldier had read before we went to Iraq and Afghanistan, because it really spelled out a lot of the same mistakes that we made all over again. So I was really shocked by that. But, just overall, I'm a military historian, so I've written a lot of articles and so on, various time frames, everything from the Civil War, American Revolution, Vietnam, and everything in between. And the one thing that I always find, which is very interesting, is just that timeless quality of service that, I can read something that a Roman centurion maybe wrote, centuries ago, and I will still find something in there that I've seen before when I was in the military. So I'm always shocked by that the technologies change, uniforms change, the reason why we go to conflict change, but that core part of being in the military, the hardships that you go through and serving alongside your comrades and so on is so timeless that I'm always shocked by that every time I research and write something else.
Was there any particular point when you were doing your research that you said, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this is just like what I went through?
Oh, wow. Especially with my dad. So he had foot problems in Vietnam. I had foot problems when I first joined the Army. So there was things like that. He got really sick. I got sick from pneumonia, same as him. So there was a bunch of different little things like that. But really the timeless experience of like the training, preparing to go to war. And then when you first go to war and that shocking part of it, when you first walk off the plane, all of that was almost the same. It was a different country, different time periods, again, different reason why we went to conflict. But all those things, when I was reading his diary and letters, it was like, holy smokes, like I know exactly what he's talking about.
Right.
I can really actually picture myself there, if you would.
Absolutely. What about differences? What were some of the big differences between what your father experienced versus what you experienced?
Yeah, I will say that, the American, I guess, way of war, if you want to call it that's kind of a term that we like to throw around in military historian circles, that there's arguments, is there really an American way of war or not? But I will say that, today's conflicts, when we send our troops to war, American people are very casualty adverse. So they want to do like the minimum amount of input into a conflict, but get the maximum amount of output. But they don't want soldiers to come home at the rate of 100 a day and things like that, like you saw in Vietnam. So the risks that my dad and his units that he was with over there is just stuff that we would have never done today, never in a million years. Simple things like he used to just jump in a Jeep and drive to the next fire base with him and like another soldier in one Jeep and think nothing of it. That's something we would have never done in Iraq and Afghanistan. It would have been 5-6 vehicles deep, bristling with machine guns poking out everywhere. So it's just that risk factor. I think it was just very different. We would have never taken those risks and made some of the decisions that they made in Vietnam because of that.
Now, do you think it's because of what happened in Vietnam that we've become as risk adverse as we are now, or is it something else that made those changes?
No, I think definitely Vietnam had a big part of it. it was at the time, it was a long conflict, the longest conflict we've had up until that point. Obviously now it's a lot longer with the global wars on terrorism. But I think there was a real war weariness that came out of Vietnam. There was a real mistrust of government decisions that they made to get us into that conflict in the first place. So really, yeah, I think, Vietnam has had a huge influence on all the foreign policy decisions since that time, even up until today. And now, you've got that ghost of Vietnam that was really impacting every decision that we made moving from that time forward. And now we're overlaying, the specter and the ghoul of Iraq and Afghanistan on top of all of that. So all of that's really going to play very powerfully into how we make foreign policy decisions moving forward, for sure.
I can imagine that's true. I mean, I know that when I listen to the news and things are happening, you hear statements like, "Is this going to be another Vietnam?"
Yeah.
And
that was always thrown around, and now it's going to be, is this going to be another Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan?
Right.
Absolutely. I worked in Congress, and that was a term that was always thrown around. You hear that, like you said, in the media. And it was a constant worry that, yes, are we going to turn to another Vietnam, this meat grinder that just churned out casualties at this high rate? And so that appetite kind of went away in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we were very careful on how the missions that we chose, how we protected our bases, the decisions that we made. So, yeah, I think a lot of that did come from Vietnam for sure.
Absolutely. And even with all of that care, there was still a lot of people who were pointing and saying, look, we're in a war. We don't know why we're here. We don't know what the outcome's supposed to be. The goalposts keep changing, all the things that you heard, and I am a wife of a military veteran. I mean, I am, pro-military 100% of the way. And yet still there were times where you sit and you think, what's happening here? Yeah. And some of it's news, where are you listening and what are you hearing? And then I think some of it is just, like you said, you get weary. I think a lot of people are under the impression that you go to war, it's over in, 2 to 3 weeks, and then you come home and all is said and done. And it's just not the way it works.
Yeah, it's just not the way it works. We have this picture of World War II is kind of the poster child of that. We have this conflict, we fight it for 4 years. We just put a nice ribbon on it, come home to tipper tape parades, and we're done. And, a lot of the conflicts that are happening today started or came out of World War II. It never really ended. And there was a whole host of further wars that directly link back to the end of World War II. So, yeah, conflict never really ends. I mean, whenever nation states decide to pick up weapons and kill each other, it's something that does not go away, and it lasts generations. And that's really what the book's about as well. I mean, it's even in the title.
Right. Absolutely. And I think you're right. Well, when you're thinking about World War II, so many of conflicts now are based on where lines were drawn and who was given what pieces of what country and et cetera, et cetera. And then from that point, then there's been these conflicts that happened that then turned into these next conflicts. And so it's almost the nature of humanity, I think, to just constantly be in this conflicted state of who owns what and who's right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and that's only going to get worse, as the populations continue to boom, resources become finite. I mean, you're just really going to see that increase over the next 50 years and so on.
Absolutely. I'm curious if there was anything you learned about your dad that you did not know beforehand that was really surprising to you.
Yeah, we think we know our parents. Because we grow up with them, and so we have this picture of them, of how they are. But when you are able to read letters, diaries, and so on from before you were even a thought in their mind, they're like a completely different person. It's like you're like, wow, you were a 20-something-year-old man. You had these hopes and dreams of these things that you were trying to do on your own. Everybody called him, said that he was a really funny guy. I don't remember him being. I remember him being he's a great dad, but I remember him being kind of a stern dad. And so that was kind of interesting that everybody was like, oh, your dad was awesome. He was hilarious. Because I interviewed a lot of people that he was in Vietnam with. And he was like one of the funniest guys I ever knew. And so that was kind of interesting. But I really got an opportunity to know my father that most people don't get to do, from just the experience of writing the book.
Absolutely. What does your dad think of the book? I'm assuming he's read it. What is his feelings behind what you've done?
My dad's from an older generation, and even me, we're kind of taught to hide our feelings a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think obviously he's proud of his service, and then proud of the book and proud of me for writing it. But yeah, he's my dad. So every so often we kind of still argue about what's in the book. Like, wait a minute, did I say that? And I'm like, yes, you did.
I've got it right here, Dad.
You did that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And so we still have conversations about it. And, and he shares it with he still lives in Hawaii. I'm in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And so he still shares it with everybody he sees. He goes and gets his car fixed, and he wants to share the book with the mechanics that are there.
Right.
So I think he's definitely proud of it. He was a war hero. He got a Bronze Star with Valor for stuff he did in Vietnam. So now I'm definitely proud of the opportunity to write the book and get to know him and how well received that it's been so far. But I think secretly he really loves it.
Yeah. Well, I think it probably is hard to look back at things that you might have said as a 20-year-old when you're now well past 20 and realize, oh, gee, did I say that? Would I have said that? Or would I say it today? Or we have the tendency to remember things the way we want to be remembered. And so we kind of like anything that doesn't quite fit that we shove under the rug.
Yeah. Memory is a crazy thing.
It is.
Because, I had my dad's, again, letters and diary, and then I would ask him about it. I would ask the people that were there that I could find. And then there would sometimes be discrepancies, and they all would swear by the memory they had of that incident.
Right.
And you'd have to kind of find the middle ground of what really happened. And then you had official military reports and stuff that I could be able to dig up. And you had to kind of balance all of that. And so it was interesting. And what's interesting about the book is that, these people that I interviewed are still alive. And so there was still some bad blood between some of them for some decisions they made at that tactical command level that may or may not have gotten people killed.
Right.
So as an author, I had to decide, do I include that in the book? Do I not include that in the book? Whereas previous to this book, my articles, I was writing about Civil War, World War II, like people passed away, so it wasn't really a big deal. So this is the first time I had to take that into consideration as well.
Was that difficult as you tried to balance, I'm sure as a historian in particular, you want truth, you're out there to find truth, but then when you find various shades of truth, because you've got memories from several men who all have their own, where even if they didn't do it on purpose, it's where they came from, where were they standing when it all happened, what were they thinking, all of those things, plus war documents that state something maybe completely contrary to other things you've been hearing. How difficult was that, trying to manage all of that and then decide what you would and would not put in based on those people who were alive?
As a historian, like you said, you want to try to capture the facts the best you can, but also as a storyteller, you want to make the piece interesting and people want to read it. So sometimes they would say something that was very controversial or very dramatic, and you'd be like, "Oh man, that'd be really good in the book." But then, like you've noticed, you had to balance that. You had to look at, which is I think easier for me as an author, having served myself, because I could put myself into their shoes and be like, okay, I understand, from a better perspective, not just a historian perspective of why they may have made that decision based on the tactical realities on the ground. So in that sense, I think it was easier for me because I could really weigh like, okay, yeah, this is dramatic. This is something that a reader would probably like to read, but at the same time, is it worth it? Is it worth destroying this person's reputation or possibly destroying their reputation? And then having their kids who are my age, get this new perspective on their father, that negative perspective on their father, possibly. So I think it was a little bit easier for me because I could put myself in their shoes and be like, okay, yeah, this is really not, he made that right decision at that point based on the facts that he had. And I don't think it would serve anybody any interest for me to put this in the book. And so I would leave it out. And there wasn't a lot that I left out. There's maybe 2 or 3 things.
Right. But I think that's true. I think that's something that people need to realize is often in a situation like war, it's not like you have a lot of time where you're sitting in the quiet of a beautiful office with a plant and a fountain with water trickling, and you can take hours to make decisions. You're deciding things very quickly in the middle of what is happening, and you might not even have all of the details. You only know what you know. And, it's hindsight is a wonderful thing.
It is. And, a lot of time when those decisions are being made, there is water trickling, but usually it's pouring rain or something like
Right,
that.
right. I was going to say it's not trickling. It's nothing pretty. It's very, and
Yeah.
there's all of the emotion that's also in it, and even officers who are trained not to have it have these emotions
They
that
do, and I think a
that
lot of
filter in.
nonfiction books about military history and stuff. One thing that a lot of people leave out is, or forget, or maybe they may not even know if they've never been in a uniform, is the pressure that's put on you to
Yeah.
achieve a result, perform. And so that really, those things I left out, that was a huge part of it, is that there was this pressure from higher up above them to make something happen, produce a body count, go to this village and do something. And so
Right.
that pressure is very real and it's huge, especially when you're a young man or young woman now, and want to do a good job and want to, achieve your objectives and stuff that are thrown
Right.
on you for your nation, for your unit. And that's a very real thing. I think a lot of people overlook as well.
Absolutely. Now, I believe you have a son. Is that correct?
I do. He's 3.5.
He's 3.5.
Yeah.
So do you think that in your mind, do you see him going into the military? Is that something that you see as would you want that? Or is that, I don't know. I'm just curious where you see that.
Yeah. It's really kind of the core of the book as well, is how my father's experience then influenced me to join the military.
Right.
Had he not been in the military, I probably would not have joined. So, I can't, my wife and I, we can't lie to ourselves and say that my service is not going to influence him. He's only 3.5. We retire next year from the Army, so he won't grow up in the military, but it's going to be everywhere. I mean, you can look on the wall behind me.
Right.
And, my uniforms are going to be in the closet, tucked away in a box, along with all my father's stuff that he gave to me. So, yeah, it's going to be a huge influence for him. And then he's going to grow up on movies, video games, things like that. That's going to influence him. So, yeah, if that's something that he wants to pursue, we'll support him, but we'll definitely talk to him about it and make sure that he makes it work for him. Yeah, he understands what he's getting into and makes the right decision, the right choice, and picks the right job and so on.
Right. I would think that would be a very interesting thing. Like you said, just because you're getting out, he'll be 4.5 then when you get out, maybe 5, right? And you'd think, well, then he wouldn't remember, except that I know that my husband retired in the 90s and he passed away this year, but he, in those between years, there wasn't one person who didn't know about his military service.
Right.
Everything about him was still military. You don't spend 25 years in the military and then it just goes away on the day that you retire. So
right.
I was teasing you when we got started because you called me ma'am, and I suspect that you will say ma'am until the day you die, because that's what you've done. So
yes,
those kinds of things will be there with your son. When people put the book down, so you do want I do believe that this book is something that someone who is not in the military would enjoy. I did. I learned a lot about both wars that I didn't really know. And I also really enjoyed getting to know you and your dad more as I was reading these stories. I felt like it was more personal than just a history. I have read a few military history books and they don't suit me. I'm a character person. I love characters. And so because this was also memoir / biography, I think that it will appeal to more people as they try to find things out. But what do you want people to get from it when they walk away? They finished your book, and other than saying, gee, I learned something, what do you hope that they get from this experience?
Yeah, I would hope that they understand that there's a human side to conflict. So, in America right now, it's really 1%, 2% of the population maybe serve. So there's this whole core of our society that don't understand what it means to send Americans to conflict and the impact that then has on their families, society as a whole, etc. So I would hope that, when our foreign policy decision makers, so our political leaders, start talking about going to war, sending troops and so on, I would hope that the American populace at large would be asked why. What are we trying to achieve there? What's literally our objective? Like, spell it out for me in a layman's terms so that I can understand it. If I'm mom and pa in Arkansas and I'm about to send my wife or daughter to war. Right. So that's what I would hope that people would get out of the book, is understanding that human side of that conflict, and then being able to also translate that to that national security, foreign policy, et cetera, and being able to ask some of those questions of our elected leaders, like, okay, why? Hear things like, oh, let's just bomb those people into oblivion. Okay, what does that really mean? Like, when
Right.
when we kill somebody, that's a big deal for that family in that other country. And so why are we doing that? What are we trying to achieve? So I guess I would hope that maybe they would get that out of it.
Absolutely. I actually wrote a book. It's called um, An Enemy Like Me. It's World
Mm-hmm.
War II, and it's based on something my grandfather told me. He fought in World War II. He fought in Germany. We're of German heritage. And I was probably 14 or so, and he told me, I always wondered if the person on the other side of my gun was a cousin.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And so I did that kind of exploration in my book, that idea of these are people.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about troops, and I hate that term because it sounds non-human,
Right.
and it's like, oh yeah, we're sending troops. No, we're not sending
Mm-hmm.
troops. We're sending young men and young women,
Mm-hmm.
older men and older women. We're sending people. We're sending fathers. We're
Mm-hmm.
sending sons. We're sending daughters. We're sending aunts and uncles. We're
Yeah.
sending, people like
Mm-hmm.
you, like me, who are going to go over, and the enemy, they're also people
Right.
who are sons and daughters. And so, yeah, it's kind of an interesting, it's a way to step back.
Yeah.
I'm not saying sometimes war is necessary. It's the only thing that's going to
Mm-hmm.
stop the evil from going on.
Yeah.
But it isn't this nebulous thing of war. It's real
Mm-hmm.
humans who are fighting other real humans.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I'm actually quarter Arabic, so when I was over there, I kind of had a more of an interest in like trying to learn the language and talking to people and so on. It's a different perspective of somebody who, like your family, is German,
Yeah.
not Arabic or whatever. They would not have had asked those questions or tried to gain an understanding of the other side of how they're
Right.
viewing things. But yeah, it's very real. Like we in America, we like to the military is kind of the easy answer. Anytime
Yeah.
there's a crisis, we just push the button and the military is going to solve it. And that may not necessarily be the answer for everything. We have to kind of get away from that. And especially when we're looking at foreign policy decisions and things that we're trying to influence overseas, the military should not necessarily always be that first answer to that crisis.
Right. Absolutely. So you're going to retire soon. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, do you think you'll continue to write? Do you have any other writing projects in mind?
I do. So I'm writing my second book right now, about halfway done with it. And so, I've with this book, I was it took me about 3.5 years.
Yeah.
We moved like twice. We had a baby. We had all kinds of stuff, which is why it took so long. So this second book's going a little bit faster. But I'd always said, okay, I want to write this story about my father and my service because it's important to me. And so I was going to try. I tried to get an agent. That obviously didn't work. Then I was going to, my second step was to try to get an independent publisher, which is where I ended up. And then I would self-publish in the end if that's the only place I could go. And so I made the independent publisher. And it's doing very well right now so far. So anyway, I'm working on my second book now, and I'm going to do the same thing. I don't know if this one will be any better. But so this book, it's kind of another family story. It's interesting. It's about my great aunt in World War II. And she was a woman Army Corps member. So she was a WAC. And so she was one of the ones that went overseas, and she was in Eisenhower's staff. Working in SHAFE, so Supreme Headquarters Allies Expeditionary Force. And so she went over she joined in 42, one of the first WAC classes. And then she went over in England in about April 44. And then she went to, she's like a week after D-Day, she was in France. 2 days after Paris was liberated, she was in Paris. And then she ends up going to Germany and gets out in October 1945. And she basically is like the WAC Forrest, the Forrest Gump of the WACs in this time period. She like saw and met like every famous person you could think of, every famous event and all these types of things. And so like my dad's, I have all her letters and her diary that she wrote. And it was really interesting because she was right behind the front line. So she's living through all the V1, V2 rockets, a sniper fired at her once. And so all these things that she experienced. And then she was working for a general officer as his personal assistant. So when the general met Churchill, met all these famous people in
She was right
Paris,
there.
she was right there in the room with them. There's a show that just came out on Apple TV. Oh man, what is it called? It's about the fashion industry in Paris right after World War II.
Yeah.
Anyway, she was there and right after Paris got liberated, and so she met like Robert Picot, Chanel, all these people. Like she met them, and so it's very interesting that show just came out as I'm writing this book. So anyway, so that's basically the book about her wartime experience, and then after the war, she goes to LA, tries to become a movie star, ends up marrying a doctor to the stars, who my grandfather thinks killed her. So she died in 1966 under mysterious circumstances. And that doctor to the stars, his first wife, died under mysterious circumstances as well. So there may be a murder mystery in there as well. I'm still researching that.
Right?
Yeah, so that's basically what the book's about. And it's very interesting because she has this perspective that as a male, I would have never noticed. So it's a very different story about World War II. So, she's a young, attractive female. So guys are like, hey, do you want to come see Hitler's train? Do you want to come see Hitler's bunker? Like all these things. So she's seeing all these places. So, for example, she went to Hitler's train and she's looking at all the chairs and stuff. And there's a chair that Hermann Göring was used in the train. And she writes about in her diary about his fat butt imprint on the chair. And that's something I would have never noticed.
Never even noticed.
Yeah.
Right.
And so all these things like that. So it's a very different perspective from the conflict. So that's basically what the second book's about. I'm about halfway through with it. So we'll see how that one goes.
Do you have a working title for it yet?
Yeah. So she worked for a general named John A. Appleton, and he was a railway man. So he worked for the railways as a high executive. Anyway, he was activated for the war to rebuild the railways for Europe, for the continent of Europe. And that's basically what he did. So it's called Fighting for Track, because she worked for the railroad guy. Right. I don't have a subtitle for it yet. I'm still kind of working through that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
and when do you hope this will be out?
Well, I hope to have it done by like springtime, hopefully.
Super.
So you know how long it'll take to get edited.
Yeah, I know. I know.
So it'll probably next year, late next year.
Wonderful. And then I'm curious, is this something you're going to keep pursuing? Are you going to keep writing now that you've got the bug, or you got your 2 family stories done and you'll move on to something else?
I mean, I hope so. So I hope to, with this book, I'm hoping to, build out my resume. And so when I retire, I can then use it. I obviously published author. It just won the Nonfiction Authors Association Gold Medal.
Fantastic.
A number of other contests. I'm hoping I can say, award-winning author that I help with my resume. It's like, put to my next career move. And then hopefully at some point, if I can make a name for myself, maybe make a little money off of it, that would be nice too. But I already have an idea for a 3rd book, so we'll see.
Super. That's great. That's wonderful. So, hey guys, if you want to keep this conversation going, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. There you're going to have a chance to win a digital copy of Born from War. Just tell me something you liked or learned about this podcast, and you will be in the drawing. So, Patrick, if someone wanted to get up with you, learn a little bit more about this story, other stories that you're planning to write, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can go to my author page, patnaughton.com. So just PATN as in Nancy, AUGHTON.com. On there, it's got links to the book. It's also got all the other articles and stuff that I've written. I've done some other book chapters, a number of other podcasts, a whole bunch of stuff on there they can check out. All the articles are free, obviously. So patnaughton.com.
Fantastic. And guys, I'll have all of that in the show notes, so definitely check that out. Grab a copy of this book. It was really good, worth the read. I learned a lot. You will too. And Patrick, I want to thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
No, thank you so much for having me on. Great conversation.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.